Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to talk about the third preseason game coming up against the Buccaneers in Tampa this Saturday night. We'll have that to get through, and then a long wait of almost 2 weeks, I guess, or 15 days for the regular season to begin, during which time there'll be practice cut downs and whatnot. But joining me here to talk about what to look for in that last game against the Bucs is Fraser Tafard. Fraser, how you doing?
Hey Ken, how are you? Glad to be back on what's going to happen for the Bucs.
Always a pleasure. The third preseason game, we were just talking about it a minute ago off air. Oftentimes, not too many decisions really made here. But I think there are a couple of things going on. One is there's some developmental live fire for some players who will not see any live fire this year. Or any or almost none. And then there's also competition for the practice squad to come up here, even though there's probably not a lot of competition for roster spots on the line.
Yep, I think that developmental piece is definitely crucial. Like you said, there's going to be some people like maybe Saleh or Ben Cleveland who aren't going to get as many snaps this year, but it's going to be beneficial for them to get the reps right now. So when they step in, they're not super cold, like they're going against our defensive line. So they're going to be somewhat game ready, but to have that experience is invaluable.
Yeah. And other players who will only really see practice reps the rest of the day, or at least that might be the case. Maybe some players like Travis Vokolek, the backup quarterback situation, in particular Anthony Brown, because Johnson may well be a part of either this team or some other team when camp is broken. We do have questions about running back, but I don't think either of those guys, honestly, that are not going to make the team, at least as I see it. And then some offensive linemen, as you mentioned. What happens to Saleh? What happens to Ben Cleveland? They have some other guys on the line who are competing for practice squads, most notably to Sean Manning, who's gotten more playing time than the other backup linemen so far. But we'll go through each of those positions and talk through what we're looking for in this third game. How about we start at tight end and lead us into this here in terms of your thoughts about tight end?
Travis Vokolek really shined last week, and it's making it really tough for the Ravens to come to a concise decision on what we want to do. Do we let Patrick Ricard walk and reset the clock with Vokolek? I think he's such a passing threat. Someone like the Patriots might pick him up. It's inevitable. I don't think he's going to get to the practice squad. He's not going to clear waivers. I think someone is going to be interested in him. So I think we're at a point where we got to figure out how to get him on the roster. And is there a market for Pat Ricard?
So certainly a possibility. So a couple things about this. First of all, they saved some money on Ricard. And by the way, I think we'd agree it really doesn't matter what Vokolek does in the third game at this point, other than get hurt. You wouldn't want that. But the if there was a he's not going to make the roster based on having another 2-touchdown game in this third week.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's shown what he can do on the field. I think it's just a matter of the numbers at this point.
Right. And yet he's going to play a fair amount, so there is some risk being taken. I guess they could give a lot of his snaps away to Ben Mason if they really wanted to do it. But a couple things come to mind in terms of Vokolek. First of all, can he line up in the backfield and be in the neighborhood of the effectiveness of Ricard as a lead blocker? Mm-hmm. And then also, how much of a difference is there in terms of his blocking on the edge if he's to be considered for that?
Yeah, I think it's more so his footwork. Can he stay in front of the level 2, level 3, the linebackers and the DBs? It's more so space game at that point rather than strength at the line of scrimmage. So if we can see him excel in that stance, then it's almost inevitable. It's an easy pick because I like him as a red zone threat, as he is kind of big, so his speed is a little bit in a lackluster category, but he makes it up for his size and his hands.
Yeah, definitely the zipper play in particular. So going up high, the back of the end zone, 3 defenders around him, was still virtually non-defensible, that
Yep.
play, because he has a much higher reach than the other players around him, and the ball was zipped in there pretty well. Is one of those plays that really makes you kind of wake up and open your eyes to Travis Vokolek in terms of what he can give you. And the other play, he didn't hurt his chances at all either by yakking it in from, I think he caught the ball at about the 5-yard line, and he imposed his size on the 2 defenders near the goal line to get in.
It's ironic. I think Mark Andrews had the same scenario for his first touchdown in the league in 2008 against Cincinnati. I think it was week 2 or week 3. He had the same style. He caught it short and just punched it in with his brute strength. So it's good to see that from him, even though it is the preseason. It's encouraging.
Yeah. Tough decision on Ricard. Ricard, there's about $1.75 million in savings if you cut him. There's a $4 million savings this year. You mentioned the reset. It really does look like it's a comparison of 1 year of Ricard versus 4 years of Vokolek. The concern I would have with it is if Vokolek, who probably will not be active for a bunch of games, if we're really looking at this honestly, it'll be Kolar who might be doing the Ricard role a lot of these weeks. If Vokolek's not active for a lot of games, are you potentially sacrificing the ability to hold the lead effectively, which is something that showed up in spades in this last game, is that the Ravens ran 8 plays in the last 14 minutes, and they barfed up the lead because they really couldn't run the football effectively.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough call because you do have to weigh the opportunity cost into either having a pass threat or having the sure thing, being able to spring runs when you need it. So again, if we had Greg Roman running the offense, it'd be a sure decision. We're keeping Ricard. But now that we have this new offense with Monken, it's going to be, he likes tight ends. He knows how to use tight ends, obviously. So do we really need Ricard? He had a nice catch in the preseason. I mean, he had a DB draped all over him and made it in traffic. But is that enough? Like, it was ironic he made that play because he's such on the bubble. It's like, dang, what are you going to do now? Travis had a good game and he had that big catch. It's hard. It's a hard decision right now.
Outrageously good blocking game from Ricard too. And there's just times when you have to play point of attack offense, and it's a fourth down thing. It's a protect the lead thing. You really just have to be able to do these things well. And I understand the sacrifice of an eligible receiver is something you don't like, but he has a lot of toys. Monken has a lot of toys to work with, and I would think you'd like to not add similar toys to the shelf here when you have a very different, imposing physical player. But that said, I'm in agreement with you. I think Vokolek, they try and get him on the practice squad, and there's going to be 2 hurdles. The first is he might get claimed because blocking tight ends are sought after and hard to find across the NFL. That's why, Tomlinson stayed around the league for as long as he did, for example. But also, even if he doesn't get claimed, where some team has to put him on the roster for 3 weeks, he might get outbid for a practice squad spot. Somebody else may be saying, and they're not bidding in terms of money because he's going to make the same money anywhere he goes, but they'll be bidding in terms of the opportunity. Yeah, that the new team has, a thinner depth chart at tight end that might be more attractive to him.
Yeah, I think on a personal level, that might be the case. I think if you looked at it in the grand scheme of things, he's developing under all-world tight end and Mark Andrews. You might be able to go to another practice squad on another team and get your opportunity faster, but he might think he's ready. I think all athletes have that mentality, but he might hit reality, kind of like Geno Stone when he was on the practice squad bubble. He went to Indianapolis. It didn't work out. He comes back, and it's worked out so far. So it's more so about him trying to develop rather than trying to go for the opportunity if he sees the big picture. But
Geno's a great example, by the way, because he's that combination versatile defender and good defensive player. Play free safety, probably could play dime, definitely can play split on the back end. So he can play a lot of different roles within that safety room. And he's also the special teams captain. So
Exactly.
This organization really values that. And if once he makes the decision that he's not going to make a lot of money in the NFL, and I mean he's not going to get a $20 million second contract, he could choose to be an NFL survivor, as a lot of players have with the Ravens, and play 8 years in the league, 9 years in the league, being a special teams ace and backup safety.
Yeah. So bringing up that situation, I think Vokalek can save himself that struggle. Even though it did work for Geno, still, he can develop very well under this offense and under this personnel.
All right, let's move on to the wide receiver group. And Wallace had his second straight back shoulder catch for a touchdown, second in 2 games. Both really well-thrown balls from 2 different quarterbacks, I think. The first one was Huntley, and the second one was Johnson, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
And really nice to see that. Do you see him as having secured a WR6 spot, or do you think there's still some competition there, or even the possibility the Ravens only want to carry 5?
John Harbaugh said during a presser that they were going to keep 6 wide receivers, right?
I don't remember hearing that, but I even if he had said it, I'd say circumstances are what they are at the time. You have to set the roster.
I think it's tough. I think Wallace looks really, really smooth. Like it's a noticeable difference between him and the back half of the roster. He's looking like he's running with a purpose this year. And we have so many other spots that we need to fill, like figuring out what to do with Ricard and Vokalek. It's so many spots that we want, but wide receiver 6 is definitely Tylan Wallace if we go that route, for sure.
It's interesting because the roster normally is 25, 25, and 3 offense, defense, and Wolfpack. And they don't deviate from that. And it's like probably both sides are screaming if there's ever variations. But this is a year that 100% of the handshake players are on the defensive side. And I think they actually could have a unbalanced roster this year on cutdown day. And then they'll be back to 25, 25, 3 prior to week 1. Because they'll have a number of handshake players that they, 4 maybe, that they use to get people onto the roster with minor injuries that don't return until week 4 or later. Mm-hmm. And then they reset the roster by bringing those guys back onto the week 1 roster.
Yep. It's going to be really interesting how we maneuver this year. I think we have talent that we need and cannot afford to let go. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be it's really interesting. I don't know why this year it seems like the depth is crucial. I think because we're kind of in this second window for Lamar.
Right. And I think a lot of the depth is crucial, and particularly when we get to the running back position, there's one of the key ones there is that, they don't have a lot of players under contract for 2024. They have a huge number of UFAs, most of whom are going to be leaving, and they're not going to be able to afford to sign. Kevin Zeitler, I think he's gone. JK is probably gone. They may find a way. Edwards is probably gone. Matabike is almost certainly gone because he'll be substantial money if he has any kind of year like we expect him to have. I'm forgetting somebody, but anyway, there's a lot of 4th-year players who are ready to go, and they've got to figure out how are we planning for 2024, not just 2023, as they go into this game.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of positions where we can have options. I think running back is definitely one of them, and Mitchell, I think he's one of the guys that we can reset with. We already talked about tight end, Vokalek as well. So we have options around the board, but it's just a matter of we have to be able to equilibrium veterans and future potential at the same time.
Yeah, I normally, I completely agree with the way that's said. I think they need to go unbalanced in the form of youth at the back end of the roster with the veterans who are leaving. So I'm particular. I mean, there are some fourth year players around this year who you got to say, while I would love to keep these guys, it just doesn't make sense. And Ricard, actually, he's not a fourth year player, but he fits into this thing exactly. He's a 1 year of inexpensive control. So they could go back to him, by the way, and have his contract reduced for this year and next year. Say take a $500,000 cut this year and $1 million cut next year, and then he's in position to make the roster now and next year.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be tough because I know Ricard wants to be under contract. No player wants to get released straight up, and I think if we were to bring him back after cut down day, would he take the vet minimum? Maybe.
That's an interesting point. So if you just cut him, I gotta believe there's
maybe a little bit over the vet minimum.
Yeah, and there's other teams I think that would want him too. I don't know. I really it's an interesting thing. It's you could obviously if you're going to try and re-sign him for something over the vet minimum, then just go ahead and negotiate it now. Yeah, everybody's adults at the table. They know the business of football. If you need to reduce him by $500,000 this year and $1 million next year, like I said, it probably is an agreement that they could reach if it's if they sit down and logically talk through that process. So. Yeah. Let's move on here because I think we need to make some pace here. But at QB, there's some talk about it during the broadcast about the race not really being completely over between Tyler Huntley and Josh Johnson. And then, of course, Josh Johnson had just a huge game in terms of what he did. The only basically a drop by Kolar and a drop by Prochet that went for the interception away from a perfect game.
Yeah, I think they came out in the first quarter on that first drive and really set the tone. They had some effective plays. Unfortunately, I think it was on the second or third drive, we had that missed block by Falele going on the sweep to the right, and Gordon just couldn't make the play, obviously, because he had a defender wide open coming towards him. But overall, I think the offense showed a lot of pop. The only thing that Huntley has over Josh Johnson is the mobility aspect. I think when you have a quarterback like Lamar, it's going to be essential that you can have a plug and play rather than maybe recreate the wheel like we did in 2018 when we went from Joe to Lamar. Kind of keep it in the same sense of offense, so we're not going back to the drawing board on what works, what doesn't work.
It's interesting. I would have said, first of all, I like the fact that Josh Johnson had a couple good runs in this game. He had a design run for 6 or 7 yards, and he had a scramble for also 6 or 7 yards. That both looked pretty good. It looked like he knew what he was doing from the mesh point, and he also knew what he was doing when he had to take off and actually ran one of his linemen, I think it might have been Falele, out of a pressure. So those were both good runs. Very, very happy with that. I think, I was in the camp, and now I convinced myself slightly in the other direction that the tenure and age of the players doesn't really matter at this point because both of them are UFAs at the end of the year. So you have to pay market value anyway. So why keep Huntley, even if he's 27 or whatever age he is? I should know that, but because it's about the third show this has come up on, well, as opposed to keeping Johnson at age 37, because both are UFAs at the end of the year. But it's not quite that simple because it could be a case where if Huntley is forced to play for you, there might even be a compensatory draft pick involved if he were to get in, sign somewhere else. So maybe a slight additional factor the other way.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting when we get to cut down day. Are they going to keep 2, let 1 go, or keep 3 and let Anthony Brown go? I think Brown had a good game throwing the ball. He was a little hesitant in the beginning of the third quarter, but The only real issue I had with him was I think the drive before Washington went down and scored. He had that big run to the right.
Yep. Didn't go down in bounds.
That was a tough play for me to see. I was just like, I was furious. Even though it was a playoff game, I was like, that's IQ to its. You can't let that happen.
Right.
It's just impossible.
Thing. Profanity at the screen when I saw that. And then the very next play is a little short pass to the right. And Owen Wright really tried to go down in bounds. You could see him trying to hold up, and then he just got basically thrown out of bounds, and they blew the whistle.
Yeah.
Rather than, let the clock run there. Of a bad couple of plays that may well have cost the Ravens that ball game. It's an exhibition game. You still want to play football like you understand how football games are won.
Yeah, I think it was that personally, I think that's what cost us the game in the end, because that clock runs and maybe Todd Monken doesn't call that play. I think maybe he goes a little more conventional and tries another run and burns more clock. It's a lot of chain reactions that go on with that, but I think that was a telltale sign for Anthony Brown on where he's at in his career.
Yeah, that's it certainly was unfortunate. Let's move on here. Talk about the running back situation. I think we're gonna forgo the discussion of how well Keaton Mitchell played in this last game and just say, are you convinced that Mitchell really has to have a spot at this point, as I am, or do you think there's any chance they could slip him onto the practice squad?
I think he has to have a spot. With the injury he had at the end of the game, what's the possibility we can IR stash him and then potentially put Ricard as the fourth running back?
He was, first of all, I guess they could do that, but he was already back at practice. So,
okay.
Yeah. So was Washington for the way. So thank goodness, in both of those cases.
Sure.
He only had one run in the whole game. That's what really surprised me. It seems like he was around the football more. He did catch a pass for -3 +9. So a 6-yard pass for -3 +9, like that yak. And then he ran the ball for 31 once to the right side. And they really showed off the speed from a variety of players. Also had the good return, on the kickoff. And he could well be the guy for that as the season starts, if they don't want to take the same risk with Duvernay. I would guess they'd probably stick with Duvernay to start with, at least.
Yeah, I think he's shown his worth, and he's definitely running back 4. I think Gordon is out of the door. I think we might have Jim on speed dial if needed. I'm begging that's not the case, but just have him ready.
Yeah. It'd be nice to go through a season without, a bunch of older backs that you're relying on for a fair number of carries. And Simpson is a guy, obviously, who fits into their 2024 plans very well. Hill will still be here as well if he continues to look like he did in the preseason. And then they can make their choice and see if they can find the right price on either JK or Gus for next year. Or maybe it's just a case of they have to let them both go and they find somebody else in the draft.
Yeah, they're going to have to get skinny somewhere because of Lamar's contract. So it might be tough.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the offensive line. The first thing in looking at this game for me was that any competition between Simpson and Saleh is certainly over. Mm-hmm. Simpson was outstanding. He was one of the of what is very rare in my scoring system is a perfect game, even in 31 snaps. So it's a reduced number of snaps. And when I do see a perfect game, it's usually like 16 out of 16 or 18 out of 18, which is below the threshold for me even giving a grade. But I can count on one hand in 18 years of doing this how many times anyone's ever had a perfect game in 30 plus snaps. And Yanda did it either once or twice, and hardly anybody else has ever done it. And it was truly an outstanding game from Simpson. But here's the thing that really gets me about this offensive line battle so far is the orchestration of this has been so well handled by Harbaugh that it gave the illusion of giving a chance to Saleh when I think they knew the chance was still pretty small, pretty low. And at the same time, lit a fire under Simpson to fix a lot of the flaws in his game. And he gets his chance, as they said was planned all along, and it probably was because there was a whole lot negative about Saleh at the point where he got swapped out.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
think. Yeah, I think we talked about that on the first preseason game on how Salah was just a placeholder to get Simpson's shit together. It's trying to get him over the hump. He had his issues in Chicago, but now he has opportunity in front of him to block for the best quarterback he's ever blocked for in his career. And he had a really good game. I think he sprung Justice Hill well on that run to the left. That one stood out to me. So he even played well at right guard. So all around, he had a really good game.
yeah, it's very promising in terms of that. And you know, right now, if he's the starting left guard, he's almost going to be locked into that position for the whole year. But looking at this roster, they don't have a lot of choices at left tackle in terms of fixing a situation if something happens to Ronnie. And I would not rule it out for Simpson to be the guy. I just would not rule it out. He has the proper length. He seems to be a fairly athletic guy, and he's got more of a left tackle build than a guard build if you just look at him physically.
You seem to not be a fan of Sharp.
I'm not a tremendous fan of Sharp. I mean, I think he's had his chance now for a couple of years to try and make a roster. And the Ravens seem to like him. I think he's a backup choice at left tackle. I kind of hope he's not the third tackle, that he's really the fourth one. The first one will be McCary. And and then you're really into emergency situations to the point where you really need to change the line. And I kind of hope it's Simpson and Salah on the left side at that point rather than Sharp and Simpson. Yeah, although when I just heard those two options, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's all good. I think Salah did have a disappointing game. He didn't follow up from his performance against Philly, particularly on the James Prochet bobble. I think you might be giving James a little too much slack on this. I know he didn't catch the ball and he adjusted very poorly, but he should have had a wide open touchdown walk in. And if Salah doesn't whiff on his block, Johnson's able to step into his throw and get into the back of the end zone wide open. Yeah. So in the dynamic of a play, I think Prochet should have made it, but to say it was all his fault, it might be a little too much. So I think Salah deserves all the blame on that play.
Yeah, I wouldn't give him all the blame, but you're right. It's a pressure on a ball that was intercepted and definitely affected the flight of the ball. By the way, you're exactly correct in the way you describe it, is that it's not an ample time situation because, Huntley, Johnson couldn't step into that throw, which is a very key element of allowing pressure. Is not, you got to not let that cone get invaded that quarterback needs to throw into. But I completely agree in terms of it not being 100-0. I still think a fair amount of the blame goes to Prochet, who let the ball go right through his hands. He's got to at least maybe it turns touchdown to an incomplete. That would have been okay, but touchdown to an interception, some of that's on Prochet.
No, yeah, I think that part for sure, because it was a close play on the sideline. I mean, the DB was barely inside, so a little more effort, maybe it wouldn't have went that way, but. Alas, I think Salah, he's not ready. I think he needs to keep developing. It's going to be crucial that he takes advantage of the opportunity we're giving him. He didn't even play at tackle, did he?
No, he hasn't seen time at tackle. And that'd be an interesting thing to see in this fourth game. Does Salah play a little bit at right tackle? Say, I'm all for it.
Go back to his, I think because at this point the experiment. I'm not going to say it's over, but it's shown its hand. I think they have the tape on Salah playing in the inside of the offensive line. It's going to see maybe can he handle the outside rush and the outside responsibilities of playing in the NFL. And then that gives the potential of Ben Cleveland maybe potentially going to left guard after he starts at right guard.
Yeah, valid idea again is that you can do some switcheroos in this game with most of the same players being out there, but the three guys who need the live fire in this game to me are Faalele, Cleveland, and Salah. Yep. And you know what? You want to throw a fourth one? It's probably Sharp. in terms of really seeing some time at tackle rather than just a few snaps to see what they've got. Now, one of the other guests on the show suggested that Sharp might be somebody they're trying to hold back on because he's a size and shape left tackle that they're not 100% sure that they can fit onto the or slide onto the practice squad without a claim.
That's personally why I like Sharp. I think he has the frame to be a good left tackle. Obviously, it's just about executing on a high level every single play. But in the sense of build, I think he's our best option over McCary. McCary just has experience and he knows what to do. That's what's holding over Sharp. I think Sharp has had his opportunity with us, especially in 2020 when Ronnie went down, and he just couldn't step up the way we needed him to. So,
yeah, he's been around. Now, David Sharp has absurd arm length at 35 and 3/8 inches. So, for those of you out there, I think that's the only thing I'm looking at. It is a great build thing. He is the right shape for a left tackle, and he almost certainly. Not almost certainly. There's a reasonable chance that he'll be taken away from the Ravens if he goes to the practice squad. But Simpson also has the length to play that position with arms north of 34 inches. And I honestly can't. As much as the length has been good, I don't think we've really seen the feet from David Sharp in his time with the Ravens.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. I think that's all what the most dominant left tackles have the best feet. I think. We've been blessed to see that with Ogden. We've been blessed to see that with Stanley. They both they're technicians at what they do. So if Sharp can maybe be half of that level, I think he could be serviceable.
Yeah. Mustapher. Now, he's an interesting case in terms of how they deal with him on the roster. Now, they could go with a backup center entirely in this game and just give it to Thomas, see what he can do all game. I think this may also be a case where they want to have a guy who's going to be on the roster. At least I think he'll probably be on the roster. Maybe hone his snapping game under live fire. Maybe, still work on some combination blocks with some other backup linemen where continuity would potentially have value at a date down the road. What do you think? How much action do you think he'll see in this game?
I think he's proved a lot this preseason. There's only been a handful of snaps where you kind of had an issue with it. I think overall he has been really good with the placement of his ball in the chest or in the stomach. If he goes on to the squad without doing any releasing and trying to get through waivers, I think you do play him in the first quarter, maybe half the second, and get him out of there and put the Thomas back in for the rest of the game. But I think Mustapher is going to be crucial in the sense of not strapping McCary into forcing him. If Linderbaum goes down, we have to plug McCary in. No, we have a designated center available. So McCary can swing as necessary.
I completely agree with that. You'd rather keep McCary as your backup tackle option. They're going to also have to find out that McCary is above the replacement level this year. And, he's been that occasionally over the course of the last few years, but not consistently. And it's something that I want to make sure that they do. But that said, there's nobody else right now who's obviously better at tackle than him. So he has to be it. But I would agree with you. You save your trump card if you can. And if you can make a 1-for-1 shift with Mustapher at center, he's been good, not just serviceable in this preseason, I'd be excited about that.
Yeah. It's just making sure that he can handle the pressure of being in the AFC North. I think we talked about this before. The defensive line,
big guys, yeah,
all in division they're top tier. They're not any slouches.
Yeah, and that obviously is one of the big deals with Simpson. Is I think I'm a lot more confident now that A gap is going to be less of a red flag to a bull for opposing defensive coordinators. Mm-hmm. That they just want to bomb that A gap. It may still be the weakest, but at least with Simpson and Linderbaum now, I think there's a higher probability of them being able to deal with some of the games that will be played on that gap.
He looked like he handled stunts very well, especially him and
yes,
Cleveland on the right. I think it was smooth all night. I think maybe Cleveland is better on the right side, period. I know he had that little hiccup with Jalen Carter but I think he had a good game this game. How did he grade out?
I didn't do his grading, but I'll tell you, I think there were 3 partial pressures that he was party to, and I've got to bring up my notes here again. Let me go right to it. This just takes a second. Boom. Yeah, he surrendered 3 full pressures. Here's the thing: he played the whole game, 50 snaps, so 3 full pressures is going to mean he's probably at best in the C range. But I didn't think that he had much else that really went poorly in the game. So I thought he was right in the middle. And playing right guard and right tackle, particularly with the effort there and it being kind of a new position, I would love for him to be an average sort of a right tackle. If he could do that and play guard at a reasonable and big level. By the way, that we did see some of that in this game. Cleveland moving people around. There are definitely a couple plays.
Yeah, like we mentioned, it looked really good on that right side. I don't know what it was, especially in the second half. I didn't see any pressures really come through there. It was mostly through Salah's side. Just getting exposed with inexperience. I hope we can. Cleveland's he's a tough case because he shows promise at times and then he falls off the face of the earth at times. So it's going to be tough to figure out what to do with him moving forward.
Okay, so let's talk roster here because that's where this comes down to for this final game. You've got 6 guys who are on the roster for sure, and that's all the starters and McCary for starters. I don't think there's any question that they're going to not retain Salah on the roster because I think he would be snatched up despite how poorly he's played in this preseason, based on a lot of things. But but I think he'd be scarfed up if they left him there. He's gotten a lot of press even nationally in terms of what's going on with him. But I think one of Salah, Cleveland, Fa'alele, and Mustafa, of those 4, I think they want all 4 on the roster, but I don't think they really want to roster 10 guys. So what I think they'll do is find one of them, the most beaten up of them from the preseason, move them onto IR to start the year, defer the decision 4 weeks, and that could be one of the handshake arrangements. That's my guess as to how this plays out. But I think 10 offensive linemen make the roster with the initial cuts and 9 on opening day.
Yeah, I think Mustafa might be that candidate for the put him on IR, get him back in 4 weeks time frame. I think we have enough confidence in Linderbaum that he's going to do his job. He's not going to get replaced. It's all about just making sure that he can stay healthy. For the time being, we can put McCary in there if it, God forbid, is in between those 4 weeks. But Mustafa will probably be that guy for me. I think Fa'alele is invaluable in the sense of if Morgan Moses goes down, he would probably be the better at right tackle. You think better than McCary?
Yes, I would say he's got much better right tackle skills, and hopefully you don't. McCary's much more of a finesse player. Obviously, Fa'alele, in theory, is a terrific power player. That's where he lacks, is in terms of really using independent, hands to strike the opponent. He has much too much contactless mirroring for a player as big as he is. He's wasting his gifts.
Yeah. So Fa'alele is definitely someone that we need to keep. And then, like you said, Cleveland, Salah, and who was the other one?
It's Fa'alele, Cleveland, Salah, and Mustafa, plus the big 6, we'll call it.
Okay. Yeah.
So 3 of those guys will be available for opening day. And honestly, they'll only have 8 guys active, so they can choose their inactive among the 3.
Yeah, I think that's probably how it'll play out in the end. Mustafa going on IR.
Let's go back to what we wanted to talk about here, because I think we got through the offensive line, and that was a lot to do. And then let's get to the right thing here. Yeah, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball here, because we haven't talked about that, and we got to pick up the pace a little bit here. Sorry to do that to you. I personally don't want to see Travis Jones in this 3rd game. I think he's shown all he needs to show. I think you bubble wrap him, get him to the opener as dominant as he's been, and there's absolutely no need that I can see to have him out there.
Yeah, I think we have to preserve as many players as we can at this point. we're gonna have to put Brett Urban back out there, and you know how I feel about that. It's
Yeah.
another player that we cannot afford to lose. So
Yeah, Urban and Blackson, both handshake deal guys, almost certainly. They're both making, if they're not making exactly the minimum, they're making very close to the minimum, and they're just obvious guys that you cut and return with. Both of them are important to the team. And I think the team really wants to carry 6 defensive linemen and not 5. I think they've been burned by that in the past. And honestly, both Blackson and Urban have looked terrific in this preseason.
yeah, and that was something we were looking for last week on how Blackson would be deployed, and it seems like we are going to keep him in the plans going forward. It might be, like you noted, it's in between Caesar, Bots, and Nichols to impress for that final bubble spot. But I think Nichols has definitely shown a lot. I think he played well in the second quarter and the second half of the Commanders game. I'm looking to see if he can build on that going against a bunch of second, third, and fourth stringers.
I liked what Caesar did, and it was surprising as a pass rusher because he's more or less a pure nose tackle and a guy who had a quarterback hit and a pass defense in a relatively, well, actually, frankly, a relatively long night of rushing the passer. But getting those 3 guys plus a little bit of Urban and Blackson to get us through an entire preseason game, you want to shorten that game. You really want to shorten that game. I think both teams will be highly incented to do that anyway. I hope this is not a game where we need to see everything from Monken's offense in terms of speed and space. Let's go at a high pace, blah, 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 blah. I mean, these aren't even the guys who are going to be playing during the regular season. Let's grind this freaking game out and get it over with, because I think the Ravens have probably as few decisions as any team in the NFL still to make on their roster.
Yeah.
Let's go move over to corner. Stevens and Seymour played a ton in the first game. They seem to have, I think, pretty well locked up their roster spots, particularly by the second game deployment, each playing only 2 series. Still, obviously, a chance the Ravens go out and find another corner. Then Darby has not seen action yet. Do you put him out there for a series or 2 at corner, probably with the orders not to get involved in any run plays?
I think I think Darby is going to need to play in the first drive at least, get his feet under him and ready to go into the regular season. I think he might get the same treatment as what Stevens got last week, just getting him in the motion and getting him ready. Seymour looked good. I think he looked really good on that left side. It seems like they like to stick their corners on one side and not let them go in between.
Favorite
kind of
shoulder.
Like we've seen. Yep. Like how we had for Humphrey and Peters. Peters is usually a left side corner if you're facing the defense.
Peters' defensive left, is a left cornerback, which means he's on the offensive right side.
Exactly.
So
So it's interesting to see how they deployed that, and then Ardarius Washington just completely locking up the nickel all night. It was really impressive to see him not have too many issues. Gave up some plays here and there, but that's going to happen when you're playing every snap at nickel. So it was impressive to see the cornerbacks last game. It's going to be interesting to see how we deploy the back half of this cornerback room, because this is where our depth needs to develop, especially with what's been happening with the top half of the cornerback room. I know Rocky Asin came back to practice the other day. It's a matter of time that someone else might go down, so we just need to continue to have people ready to go and see if they can handle at least third stringers and fourth stringers in the NFL.
So here's my question for you. Ardarius Washington has played a ton of snaps already in this preseason. I don't see any need for him to play anymore. There's nothing left to prove. He's made the team. He's the starting slot corner as far as I'm concerned. He should. My own personal view is he should sit this game out. If he does play at all, same thing as Darby maybe. Let's see if they get a chance to play together, maybe play one series. But slot corner in particular, much more physical position. He really has to be involved in run plays normally. I would just prefer to see him sit out of this one. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, same way. He did have a little scare near the end of the game on that knockout, but we do need to keep him under wraps and ready to go for week 1 because he's crucial to freeing up Kyle Hamilton, freeing up Stevens, freeing up everyone on this defense, because if we can get someone to man that nickel role, and once Humphrey comes back, he can worry about the outside and we can figure out who's going to man him on the other side when he comes back, either Brock Eason or a combination of Stevens and Seymour. I'm interested to keep him out of the game. I don't want him in the game at all tomorrow.
In a way,
Friday.
Isn't it even more of an important thing to keep him out of the game when Stevens and Seymour are already cornerbacks 3, forgetting, with Humphrey out, our cornerbacks 3 and 4 on the outside as it stands now, but Ardarius is 1 in the slot. It really would be a nightmare to lose Ardarius at this point. I don't want to overstate the fact, but having Hamilton play where you really want him to play is a point I've made the whole offseason, is that they need to make him into a superstar, and the tail can't wag the dog in terms of him having to move around to fill a need at slot corner.
Yeah, I think it's tough that we didn't get to see Pepe Williams get a chance at slot. He was last year. He's shown a lot of promise before he got hurt. Same Arthur Millette. He hasn't even really touched the field at all. I think he had maybe 1, 2, 3 practices, and he was gone after that. So it seems like we have things under wraps and behind the scene, but week 1 starts in less than 2 weeks, or a little bit over than 2 weeks. So we need to figure out how we can deploy the back half when the front half is ready to go. And then how do we factor in the other pieces coming back from injury in the middle of the season?
Yeah, that's a real question, because you in particular with Pepe, who you mentioned, they either have to put him on season-ending IR, not use a roster spot on him, or they have to use one of their handshake trump cards to get him onto the roster as one of 54 through 57. And either way, it's not an ideal situation. In his case, given how well Washington has played, given the fact that they do have some other options at nickel, even though they're not great in terms of A, Mollett, and B, Hamilton, I guess, I would be inclined to think that they're just going to stick him on season-ending IR and not mess with trying to get him on the roster. But I don't really, obviously Harbaugh's not saying exactly when he's expected to be back, just not that it's not expected to be a season-ending injury. But that doesn't mean that you're really excited about getting Pepe Williams back in, say, week 10, if you have to use up one of your important handshake deals to start the season to get that accomplished.
Yeah, I think Pepe is definitely an interesting case because he can bring a lot of depth when he gets healthy. But like you said, do we keep him on the team for the initial cut and then do the handshake deal? But we have so many people on the bubble. Mm-hmm. Is he worth that deal? And I don't know. It's tough because that's going to be another year off his tenure. Yep. And that's one less year of control.
Yeah, I mean, he'll be a year 3 player. He'll start squarely on the bubble next camp. If he doesn't produce, he's probably gone. Yep. And it's an unfortunate situation, but that's just the life of an NFL player, is that, availability can just be a killer if you don't have it. Let's talk about Arthur Mollett for a second, because he has $220,000 of guaranteed money in his contract. I think it's a sunk cost at this point, given how little he's actually played during camp. But is he a guy that you might want to use let's say you don't play him in this final game. And I think that the desire is going to be to have him play and see what he can do. But let's say you don't play him in this final game. Would you then try and put him on the roster via one of these handshake agreements, and then you maybe have a backup slot corner starting in week 4?
What's the opposite? Why? I don't know how to phrase this. Why isn't he able to be one of those handshake deals? I mean, is
He's
there
a fourth-year player.
Oh, okay.
Let me check.
So
Let me check. Confirm that's correct. But I think that's right. No, that's not true. He's a 7th-year player. He can, in fact, be a handshake guy.
Yeah.
I had this. Who am I thinking that I had wrong? It's Mustafa who I was looking at. He's a 4th-year player, and I didn't really remember that. But he can't be handshake. He'd go through the waiver process if he did. So it's a possibility, and maybe that's what they do. And in fact, I think the risk of losing Mollett off your practice squad is actually pretty limited right now. So maybe it makes sense, bring him back when you need him.
Yeah, I think that's a good deal.
All right. If you bring him back after week 2, they have to obviously re-sign him. But if you bring him back after week 2, he's got his guaranteed money, but he's not guaranteed on the back end if the Ravens cut him at some point during the season.
Yeah, that's a really good quick out on that option.
Talking about the rest of the guys on the roster now, and it's incredible that we're at this point with JAD, who was a 4th-round draft pick last year, but has missed all 5 of his potential preseason games and has something like 50 snaps of play in the NFL. He's got to find a way to get on the field. I would think this last game is a significant audition for him, and there aren't very many in terms of this team, but he and Hayes and Kelly at the cornerback spots ought to get most of the reps in this game. And I would think that there really is a competition potentially between JAD and Hayes for that last roster spot.
Yeah, it's been really disappointing from JAD. I expected him to play against the Commanders, but obviously that didn't work out. So he needs to play the whole game coming up. I don't think he should have one drive, one play off. He needs every single rep. Kaibu Kelly had some good plays last week. I think obviously the one really big exciting play is when he had the hit on the 2-point conversion to stop. I think that was kind of encouraging to see him make that play, maybe gain a little confidence. So going into this game, maybe that can kind of go into his pass coverage game in the sense of feeling a little more comfortable with the speed of the game, understanding concepts that are going in front of him and behind him.
And there's no substitute for live fire. He hasn't had it, and he needs to get it. And it's true of both of them, meaning JAD and Kelly. In Hayes' case, he's a 3rd-year player. He's a smaller guy, and he is a guy that I really hadn't considered as a slot possibility. Obviously played pretty well on the outside in this game. But he did also make a tackle downhill for a loss of 1. So 2 passes that were targeting him were downhill tackle, loss of 1, and interception. So if you want to try and make a football team during the preseason, that's a good way to do it, not be targeted otherwise during the game. But the other thing that comes out of that is for a 5'9", 188 guy, a little bit on the smaller side, would he really be the best option as the backup slot corner on this team? And maybe he does it from the practice squad as an elevation as needed because he was already cut this preseason, went through the waiver process, and the Ravens got him. So that's pretty far down the line in terms of the cut process. Or now that he's got some good tape under his belt, is that too risky a situation? And I think the Ravens are pretty measured on this. I think Hayes probably ends up going to the practice squad based on who he is and the fact that he's a 3rd-year player, and you have less option risk being destroyed if you lose him.
Yeah, I think what's the possibility we snag some people off the waiver wire? Yeah.
Definitely a possibility. Definitely a possibility. The waiver wire, even more likely a possibility that maybe someone gets cut at the end of camp and they like some 50-year corner, or there's another veteran out there that they want to sign, or they trade for somebody. My big trade that I've been suggesting now for a while. So, the position of strength they could trade from his inside linebacker. If you want to find a corner around the league, that would be a possibility as well. All right, let's keep talking. I can't hear you right now if you're talking, so we'll just I'll just keep going here. Go over to the inside linebacker position. Trenton Simpson does not look like he's going to get a lot of playing time this year if Queen is still on the Ravens roster come opening day, and if that's the case, I think they're a committed nickel team and they'll be that way the whole year. But how important is it for Simpson to see live fire in this last preseason game?
I think it's really important. I think McDonald maybe tried to hide Simpson a little bit with the last couple of drives. It was all-out pressure. He maybe dropped back a handful of times, but a majority of the time he was a linebacker going on the rush, and he didn't seem to make much of a difference in the pocket, which was disappointing as well.
Well, he had the sack fumble -9 where he ran over the court running back on that last drive, so that was kind of nice. But I agree. I mean, I think my problem is that he has a very significant overlapping skill set with Queen. So it's not clear to me how you really ever get him on the field during the regular season if Queen and Roquan are both healthy. You can get him on the field in a mop-up role, but how do you ever get him on the field when you really need him to perform at a high level during this first year? And how do you get him on significantly? Because I cannot come up with the package that makes sense for him to be on the field as a defender with Queen and Roquan there as well.
Yeah, I think the horses that are in front of him are just too skilled. I don't think he has any real room to get on the field. Like you said, maybe in cleanup time if we're up big, but it's going to be tough for him to find a way, even if we go.
Losing you. You're in and out, Frazier. All right, I'm sorry. I'm gonna keep moving here, and hopefully you'll come back in terms of the sound here. A lot of mix and match opportunities with their backup linebackers after Harrison is off the field. Del'Shawn Phillips, a fourth-year player, actually has to go through waivers. I think there are probably enough teams in the National Football League who kind of have an eye on what Del'Shawn Phillips has done in this preseason. There's enough tape on him out there that I think special teams reputation that he might get selected if he's cut. So the question is, has he really made the roster? And then the Ravens have all of a sudden 5 inside linebackers they're carrying. They've done it before, so they could do it again, but it still seems like kind of a lot for this team.
Yeah, I think Del'Shawn Phillips has shown a lot this preseason. He's shown kind of more of a veteran presence, but being that he is a fourth-year player, you know how much I like Josh Ross, and I value how young he is and how knowledgeable he is of the game. I think it should be Queen, Roquan, Harrison, Ross, Simpson, and then Phillips and Welch in that order. Well, not obviously Queen and Roquan, but you get what I'm saying.
So
the back half,
you have Phillips getting cut if that's the case, unless you have somebody else getting traded.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So if we look back at the last 2 games in order of entry, we saw Phillips come in and start the game with Harrison. And first game, I think they started the game as well in that game with 40 and 53 at linebacker. So if that's the case, why didn't Simpson play in Del'Shawn's spot with Malik on those, and I just, looking at how the Ravens are viewing it, I think Del'Shawn has a more secure roster spot based on where I am right now.
Yeah. Do you think Ross clears waivers?
Maybe. He didn't really play great in this last game. He had some things that didn't really look that great against the run. I think it's possible he clears, and so we'll see. And I think maybe you take a chance also. He's a second-year player now, so it doesn't have quite the same option value he did a year ago. And maybe you just take a chance and have to run him through on the roster spot. Sometimes you're deep at a position and you just deal with it. And then the other possibility is maybe the Ravens trade someone. So maybe Malik Harrison isn't on the team come opening day. Maybe Del'Shawn Phillips, they trade for a 7th, say, or maybe they trade Queen and really get the cornerback they need.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, that's the area of surplus that we can definitely reap some kind of capital benefit from.
Yeah. Let's move on to safety here. Talk a little bit about this. A lot of guys playing safety in this game don't really have a particularly good chance to make the team. I imagine we'll see Worley in the early going, and I do think Worley is going to make the team because I think he gives them a lot of versatility. And they kind of bubble wrapped him in this last game after a terrific performance in the first game where he basically almost single-handedly won all the high leverage plays that closed out the game.
Yep.
I guess the question is this. Worley also is a flexible handshake guy, so he'll be cut and then returned, I would think, by week 1. They might even cut him and return him week 2. Who knows if they want to play that game. They're probably taking a risk, and they probably know it if they do, and I think there might be other NFL teams who'd be interested. But that's the nature of these guys. They don't go through the waiver process when you have as much experience as they do, and you hopefully get a good understanding built up between the two and a level of trust. And I think Worley realizes, like a lot of special teams players do, that this is a great situation, that the Ravens really love him based on the 18 or whatever it was transactions last year, and that this is a good spot for him. So I hope he demonstrates a little bit of returned loyalty to the Ravens after seeing how they've treated him.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have that back end depth just ready to go whenever. I think Ardarius having experience there does help, but we need that nickel really, really locked up by him. So having that additional back end talent is definitely crucial.
So Geno Stone is on the team. I don't think anybody's questioning that. And then they've got Worley probably as the additional safety there, and also gives you some variability. And then a guy who Houston Carson, very similar to Worley, probably not as good in terms of what he's accomplished in this preseason, but it's similar in terms of, he made a play, picked up a fumble, was in the right place. I think he did a little bit less of that on the back end, but then on that final drive, as you mentioned, pretty much everybody was at the line of scrimmage rushing the passer. They didn't have anybody drop into coverage from the safety group. They had Lucien was rushing the passer too, and so was Houston Carson. So I don't really see him as a factor on the roster, though. He, potentially is a practice squatter.
Yeah, potentially. I think safety is one of those positions where everything's pretty much set in stone and what we're going to do. I don't think there's much variation there.
Right. I agree. I think that the real question is probably Lucien and how aggressively they want to try and position him to learn the safety role. And that's where he's played pretty well in these 2 games. If you put him at safety, one of the things he said to me on the interview the other day was that, he would take it as a good thing because it would give him the whole year potentially to learn the safety position. And extremely mature attitude with regard to that, by the way. And I think that it could really be good for him. And, injuries happen in the National Football League. He seems to be a very fast learner and a very smart guy. So this would be a case of something where he could find himself on the game day roster sometime in midseason if there's an injury.
Yeah, I was really impressed with his interview that you had on your show. I think he, like you said, being an engineer, graduating, getting his degree, I think that's really impressive for him to translate that knowledge and work ethic onto the field. It can only do you well in excelling in what you do.
Let's move over to outside linebacker. All right. So one of the questions will be, do we see a Jabo in this game? A guy who's still, frankly, seen some fairly limited live fire, but he's also in the Ravens' plans to be a situational pass rusher. I think he'll be active every week this year. Where are you on getting him some additional play in this final preseason game?
I think it doesn't hurt for him to get his confidence up. I think he can. Him and Odafe, I think we experienced this with Odafe firsthand. Once he gets to the top of the rush, he kind of just starts bull rushing. I think this game gives Ojabo the opportunity to start actually using moves and implementing them instead of worrying about the outcome of the play, because it's a preseason game. If they get the first down, if they get a touchdown, it doesn't matter. You're here to really focus on your technique and make sure you can do best as an individual and hone in on your craft. Because last game he played in the first quarter on the first 2 drives, and he really didn't have any noticeable pressure. I think he had maybe one coming off the left edge. He did give him a little push, but a bull rush nonetheless. Yep. No finesse, none of the moves we saw in Michigan. So I think he needs to understand the speed of the game, and God forbid that injury that he suffered in the training camp is hindering him, because all you heard before that injury is how fast he is, how quick he is, how much burst he has.
When you say the training camp, you really mean at his pro day last year, right, where he got hurt?
No, I mean, the word at a camp was that Ojabo's looking good.
No, I'm buying that. You mentioned, God forbid, you're referring to the Achilles injury, though, that he had previously, and that hopefully hasn't had some impact on him.
Didn't he have a little flare up in the middle of camp that forced him to be out for 2-3 days, 4 days?
Yeah, you're right. He was out for a few days. Few days.
Yeah. I'm hoping that that's not something that affected him and his explosiveness, because the way they were talking about him in the beginning of camp doesn't seem like it's relating or translating over to the field. So maybe there is something there that's causing him to not play freely.
I got another theory on it, is that he got so badly burned, and he kind of burned himself from the first game in terms of maintaining the edge, that he overcorrected in the other direction to be more of a 2-gap edge defender, make sure that the edge was set properly, and that he needs to find that happy equilibrium. And the truth of the matter is, I'm all in favor of your way of playing him this week. Is show me the all-out pass rush. Show me move after move, get after the quarterback, wreak havoc, and don't worry about the consequences. The people, your teammates will pick it up behind you. And let's see what you can do in terms of compound move. But basically, stick it to whoever that tackle is. They're not going to be a very athletic tackle. It's going to be a second-string guy that he faces. And stick it to him play after play. Give him a hard first move that forces him to react, and see how easy it is to show him the second move off of that. And I think that Ojabo in particular way as well, who won't play in this game no matter what, are very well suited to do that. And Ojabo, actually, he really needs to get comfortable with that at the NFL level again, and stop worrying about losing the edge. Because frankly, I don't think he's going to be on in any run situations pretty much the entire year.
Yeah, I think he sealed his fate in the beginning of the preseason. I think he's especially going to be a third down package guy, maybe second down and long in obvious passing situations. Not to say he might not be able to fill in on the run here and there, but it looks like I personally cannot wait to see Odafe, in the sense of where is he at in his career, because we haven't got to see him in the preseason at all. I want to see if he's developed that pass rush, if he's made that transition from speed to power, because he has the potential. He has the measurables. It's all about just putting it on the field. And Ojabo has disappointed so far. It's super early. It's only the third preseason week, but I'm excited to see what he has to offer, because Odafe needs to work out. Ojabo needs to work out. Tavius Robinson hasn't shown any burst. I think he's more so a run fit guy, just a heavy hand in the run game. Clowney, he's a veteran. He can give you something on the fact that he has the savvy IQ that most young players don't have, on how to get through on a tackle, how to get through on a guard, on a stunt, or going on an over. I think if we have a lot riding on this outside linebacker room, we haven't shown any pressure in the preseason. Not to say that's going to result into the regular season, but you would like to see that some of that additional coaching that we bring in the offseason pay off a little bit.
Yeah, you would like to see that. And honestly, to be fair, haven't seen any of their 3 best pass rushers on the outside. Haven't seen Bowser, obviously, because he's been hurt the whole time, and that's not a good thing. It does bode very poorly for the team for the season. But we haven't seen Odafe in a preseason games. He's looked really good in practice, but we have not seen him in the preseason. And we haven't seen any of Clowney as yet. And so we'll see there. And I'm putting Clowney ahead of Ajabo, and Ajabo may actually be the team's third best pass rusher, or even second best pass rusher, potentially. But it's just not obvious right now that is the case. I do think he'll be active on a weekly basis, whereas I think Tavius Robinson is going to get a lot of inactives now with the acquisition of Clowney.
Yep.
And the other guy that I really want to make sure we hit on is Malik Ham.
Yeah.
Because we saw him drop now 11 times in 2 games. I think he's almost certainly headed to the practice squad, but he has not been targeted yet in 11 drops. It makes me feel pretty good about the possibility that he could be the backup Sam.
How many drops did he have against the Commanders?
11. 5, 6, and then 5 against the Commanders. But it was a higher percentage of the pass snaps he was in for. So he went up from 24 to 31 from game 1 to game 2.
Yeah, and that's something we talked about in the pregame last week, is can Malik Ham get those opportunities dropping in Sam into a zone? I think he's shown flashes in the pass rush, and they're obviously giving them opportunity on the outside covering. So hopefully he clears through waivers and we can get to retain him in the practice squad. I think he's key depth and what we want to accomplish, especially if Clowney cannot be the zone guy. We need him to be on the outside as a Sam. We can bring in the younger guy with, quite frankly, more faster feet, more agile compared to Clowney, who's more of a power rusher trying to get to the quarterback in between the tackles. So I'm excited for Malik Ham. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think they'll use Clowney in a hybrid role because I think he's there to eat some early down Sam snaps as a run defender who can give you a little bit of pass rush. And then on third down, he's going to be in there in the package, but as you said, probably rushing from the inside.
Yeah, honestly, I know in the Eagles pregame, I said I wasn't really a fan of Clowney. I still am skeptical about the signing in the sense of he's quit on the teams before, and I just don't. Not to say that Van Noy would be a better signing. He was just the more surefire thing at Sam, and we can clearly define what to do for Odafe and Ojabo. But now that he's in the picture, it gives us more flexibility on the interior defensive line, and it doesn't force us to play Pierce as much because we can give him a breather and put Travis in there and not force Urban to be in there at every play. So it gives our other veteran guys relief as well with this Clowney signing. So Malik Ham being on the practice squad is going to be essential into getting a better rotation on the defensive line.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they had well over 2, I think it was about 2.2 defensive line snaps per play, where in 2018, I think there was something like 176. So that's actually a huge difference. That's like getting one additional player to play 44% of the snaps is what you got to think of it as. And, having Clowney to take a lot of these obvious pass situations on the inside does reduce your total snap count workload for your defensive line. And that's it is a very big deal. Yeah. All right. Outstanding talking about this. I think we had some other general comments, but we're already at 1 hour and 13. I'm going to cut it off here. Frazier, terrific doing this with you during this preseason. I think we'll get together for at least one show during the regular season to review either the offense or defense. But tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
You guys can find me at Twitter, F_RAVE8. That's F_Rave8.
All right, outstanding. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. This is the way I meet people, and great pleasure to meet Frazier here. And already we've done 3 shows in short order, and I've really enjoyed our discussions, Frazier. And I want you out for more. And again, I'll say this: I do about 320 shows per year, 330 shows per year, and all but 10 are done with a guest. And nobody does more than about 10 to 12 shows at the absolute top end. So I'm looking for new people to meet all the time who'd like to do a show or two every once in a while and talk football with me. I always appreciate it, and I really enjoy meeting new people. Frazier, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.